These psychological facts will blow your mind. In the collective human subconscious lies an innate drive to know more and learn more. After all, knowledge is power, and power can be safety, prosperity, and therefore happiness. In this impulsive quest, humankind has studied the waters, the inner earth, the air, and the cosmos. Why wouldn't we focus on the science of how we think and perceive our environment? So here are some psychological facts that will blow your mind. The dopamine made me do it. The human brain is the most complex organ in the human body. Our 3-pound mass of gray and white matter is the control center that allows all human activity. We can't live without it. Remember what Morpheus told Neo in The Matrix?
The body cannot live without the mind.
The feeling of pleasure is how a healthy brain identifies and reinforces beneficial behaviors, such as eating, socializing, and sex. It's the sense of accomplishment we feel after exercising or achieving a goal. And our brains are wired to increase the odds that we will repeat pleasurable activities. The neurotransmitter dopamine is central to this connection. The reward circuit is activated by a healthy, pleasurable experience, and a burst of dopamine solidifies your memory and triggers a habit function. Then, soon enough, the dopamine signals will become impulsive. Dopamine is a natural drug that our own bodies create, and this chemical plays a starring role in motivating behavior because our brains have 4 major dopamine pathways, all located in different parts of the brain. These pathways are the highways for chemical messages called neurotransmitters, and each neurotransmitter has its own cognitive and movement process. No wonder we are addicted to things like cola, sugar, sex, and even phones. Our brains are secretly plotting for us to get its fix. Now that we know that it's our own dopamine cognitive functions that are the culprits of some of our bad habits. So when we commit some of those deadly sins like lust, gluttony, sloth, or greed, we can no longer say, "The devil made me do it." Just say, "The dopamine made me do it." Perpetual expectation. Your truth might not be true at all. Do you see what is actually in front of you, or does your mind regulate what you see according to your perception? Research shows that the way you see the world is heavily influenced by your own past experiences, expectations, motivations, beliefs, emotions, and even your culture. So, in reality, our perception is biased. For example, if you have an inclination for science fiction, when you look at a group of clouds, you might see an intergalactic giant moving in our atmosphere. But a mechanical engineer might see half a dozen fighter jets going into sonic boom. Author of the textbook Discovering Psychology, Sandra Hockenberry explains that, in truth, perception can also be influenced by an individual's expectations, motives, and interests. So what you see in many respects is not what you get. Psychologically, perpetual expectancy is a predisposition to perceive things in a particular frame of reference. Fortunately, sometimes perpetual expectations can be helpful. They often lead us to making fairly accurate conclusions. But of course, in cases where we find ourselves wrong, we must develop new perpetual sets that are more accurate, or we will always be led astray. Foreign language logic. Did you know the language you use affects the decisions you make? This might be why your parents told you to wash your dirty mouth with soap if you shrieked a string of obesities after hitting your funny bone. Just like Will Smith's character Detective Spooner told his adolescent friend Farber in I, Robot.
Stop cussing and go home! Okay.
Although cussing can be a great way to purge your emotions completely, feelings are irrelevant in several cases and can lead to a chain of irrational, unfortunate events. So you'll be quite surprised to know that speaking a foreign language can have effects on your rational decision-making. This concept has been proven to be valid in classrooms, money-related choices, and even anger management. In April of 2012, a series of experiments were conducted on more than 300 people from the US and Korea, and findings showed that thinking in a second language reduced deep-seated, misleading biases that unduly influence how risks and benefits are perceived. In this psychological study headed by psychologist Boaz Kesar of the University of Chicago, it was found that reinforcements of the hypothesis that human reasoning is shaped by 2 distinct modes of thought, one that's systematic, analytical, and cognition-intensive, and another that's fast, unconscious, and emotionally charged. When using all the mental facilities that come with speaking a foreign language, people were able to judge a risk more clearly. Now, I bet you wish you'd paid more attention in your high school foreign language class. Canonical perspective, a universal perspective. Canonical perspective is how everyone's view of sight has almost the same side, angle, or viewpoint. We actually normally see items to the side and slightly above. This is the view known as canonical perspective. Most canonic perspectives are also from the front, rotated to the left a few degrees, and almost always viewed from a slightly elevated position. Let's engage in a quick test that will take less than a minute. All you have to do is think of your favorite coffee or tea mug and quickly draw it. Go ahead, grab a pencil and paper, pause this video, and draw the mug. Welcome back. At this point, you should have your coffee mug drawn on your paper. Now, please compare it to these. Don't they look similar? It looks the same because of canonical perspective. Previous investigations of visual object recognition have found that some views of both familiar and unfamiliar objects promote more efficient recognition performance than other views. These views are considered canonical and are often the views that present the most information about an object's 3D structure and features in the image. In several experiments, psychologists found that these consistent or canonical views promoted better haptic recognition performance than other random views of the objects, and provides a greater idea of the visual and tactile systems of how objects are represented in memory and thus recognizable. The genius Leonardo da Vinci must have been a genius because he understood this so many centuries ago when he created the Mona Lisa. Sarcasm is for the intellectually inclined. Oscar Wilde, author of The Picture of Dorian Gray and The Importance of Being Earnest, said, "Sarcasm is the lowest form of wit, but the highest form of intelligence." And psychology somewhat proves him correct. But that doesn't mean that communication experts and marriage counselors alike typically advise people to refrain from sarcasm to keep the peace. Sarcasm is the most common form of verbal irony and is used to convey disapproval or scorn with a shade of humor. It involves constructing or exposing contradictions between intended meanings. So, even though the sarcasm of Chandler from Friends had people cracking up with laughter, some sarcasm can be demeaning, obnoxious, and condescending. Plus, sarcasm is often misinterpreted, especially when communicating electronically. But believe it or not, according to studies, those who engaged in a sarcastic conversation fare better on creativity tasks. Because the brain must think creatively to understand or convey a sarcastic comment, sarcasm may lead to clearer and more creative thinking. To either create or understand sarcasm, tone must overcome the contradiction between the literal and actual meanings of the sarcastic expressions. Studies also show that sarcasm expressed toward or received from someone we trust is less conflict-provoking than sarcasm expressed toward or received from someone we distrust. So be mindful of the appropriate times to be sarcastic, but by all means, give good-hearted sarcasm as it actually exercises the brain and increases creativity. The Dunning-Kruger effect. Knowing is half the battle. The Dunning-Kruger effect shows why some people think they're great even when their work is terrible. Coined in 1999 by then Cornell psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger, the Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias whereby people who are incompetent at something are unable to recognize their own incompetence. And the same thing can be said about their flaws. And not only do they fail to realize their incompetence or flaws, they're also likely to feel confident and boastful regardless. Professor Dunning notes, "The knowledge and intelligence that are required to be good at a task are often the same qualities needed to recognize that one is not good at that task. And if one lacks such knowledge and intelligence, one remains ignorant that one is not good at that task." With that said, generations who grew up watching G.I. Joe cartoons on Saturday mornings will never forget the last lesson they always said after each program.
And knowing is half the battle.
Examples of the Dunning-Kruger effect are everywhere. In 1999, a white paper was released called Unskilled and Unaware of It: How Difficulties in Recognizing One's Own Incompetence Lead to Inflated Self-Assessments, and consisted of 4 studies in humor, grammar, and logic. Participants scoring in the bottom quartile grossly overestimated their test performance and abilities. And the tests were not only taken with college kids. The tests found that even professionals like software engineers fell into the Dunning-Kruger effect. A nationwide survey also found that 21% of Americans believe that it's very likely or fairly likely that they'll become millionaires within the next 10 years. Which one of these psychological facts is the most astonishing and relevant in your life? We're happy to pick your brain in the comments section below. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and ring the notification bell.